think about people that you killed, here's one way that you might think about it. Very little of that was done. Now, it's not up to the Marine Corps or the Air Force or the Army to be the spiritual leaders or guides, but on the other hand, it is up to either somebody in that organization to bring that kind of perspective, and that's what was missing. And I think that where that primarily can come from is older people in the organization. That when somebody gets promoted, I went out and got drunk. It might have helped if the colonel had come in and say, you're getting promoted and it's serious, it's a big responsibility, congratulations, but here's some things you ought to think about. Bringing in some of these psychological, and I say spiritual sides, because what you're engaged with in this profession is something that really should be left up to the gods. I mean, you're gonna be asked to take a human life. The purpose of the military is not to take lives. I think body count is really a bad measurement. The purpose of the military is to stop the other side from taking your people's lives. And sometimes you have to use violence to do that. As soon as they stop, that's when you stop. And I think that in that kind of a situation, that is a spiritual situation, and we don't think about that. People are actually sacrificing themselves. It happens all the time. The old sort of, throw yourself on the grenade. That's a sacrifice, and what is sacrifice? Sacrificial rites are religious rites. And so you got to think deeply about the profession you're in. You are involved in something that's way more serious than making money. And I think we could spend a little more time preparing that way. I don't know the answer of how, but I think we need more of it.
Can I ask you about your novel set in a time when the country had a draft?
Right.
Now we have an all-volunteer service. Though you're not, intimately connected with the military right now, obviously you have some perspective. As you look back on it, and some of the characters that are in that novel that I know represent people that actually served under you, and many of them were there involuntarily.
Mm-hmm.
Is it better to have that broader reach out to society, or is it better to have a professional military that's more focused on what they're supposed to be doing day in, day out?
That's a great question. Thank you. I have a definite opinion about it. The professional military came into existence, I think, because it was a way that the political system could get out from underneath the heat of a very unpopular draft. That was because when the draft was instituted, I think it was it First World War, a long time ago. Oh, it was just before World War II. People were generally in favor of the current foreign policy. Obviously, Vietnam, it started to fall apart. And where it really started to fall apart, and here's where I think we have to think about it, is that it was unfair. They had something called the 2S deferment. And if you went to college, you didn't have to get drafted. And so we ended up drafting kids that were basically not college bound. And later in the war, they got rid of this. But by that time, it had become so unpopular that people were out protesting. And I'm convinced that the heat of the protests and the amount of them tripled, quadrupled as soon as they took the 2S deferment out. And so then we said, we're going to get out of that, and we're not going to have that unfairness anymore. And I think also just a little bit, we don't know how to put up with this kind of heat. So now we have the all-volunteer military. Well, I was at just south of Fort Bragg. I was at Fayetteville doing a reading just this last summer, and a young couple comes up to me, and the woman's got a baby in one arm, and she's got a little child in the other guy, and the guy's sitting next to me, he's about 20, and in his whatever the Army calls utilities, fatigues. And she starts to cry. I'm going, what's the matter? And she says, well, he's shipping out in 2 days. So I turn to this kid and I say, wow, your second tour? No, sir, my seventh. 7 tours? We're talking about fairness? I mean, that family's not going to make it. The odds are really, really against it. So we've gone from the draft to a situation where we have a very, very tiny percentage of this country carrying the load. We've been at war in Afghanistan longer than the Russians. It's been over 10 years. Maybe we should think about drafting people. And there's a lot of ways you can make it fair. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be done besides military. We can build roads and forest trails, and I know I sound like you're a fascist. You just want everybody to go, join the workforce. Yes. The reason is because this is called a republic. And if you're going to be a member of the republic, you're in the boat. And if you're in the boat, you should row your oar. And I think we're in a very serious situation where what I call the military L is starting to provide a disproportionate number of people in the military. Starts around North Dakota and Illinois, goes down to Texas, turns right through Georgia, I went to Yale, and at Yale there was a place called Wolseley Hall, and there's a bronze plaque that's huge, way up high in Wolseley Hall with the names of hundreds of dead Yaleys, hundreds. World War I, World War II. They don't even have ROTC there now. And I think that this is really a serious issue. And I don't know the exact solution, but I think that the current solution is not good. There's a lot of things that are bad or worrying about it. One is that we end up with a Praetorian Guard that the president can basically commit whenever he wants to, and there's no real political feedback because everybody's a volunteer. And I don't know how many times I've heard people say, well, they volunteered. I think that's pernicious. I think that's not a good thing to have happen, especially when you're in a war that's lasted 10 years. So you got me on my hot box. That's where I am.
We can take one more question.
Sir, yeah, I was just wondering, so you had some time between when you first finished the novel and when it was published. I was wondering if you could share any of the big changes that you made before it got published, like if there was an aha moment in there. Because a lot of things you said, I experienced all those things in the second and first lieutenant.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure I understand. After I finished getting the novel done in a draft, as a result of writing the book?
Yes, sir. I'm wondering if there are any things that maybe you thought you left out and then later you went back.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Over the years.
Well, one of the things that about fiction and literature in general, and this was one of the things that did happen to me writing this novel, is that you have to get into other people's shoes. If you write a memoir, the reader just sort of sees it from the viewpoint of the guy writing the memoir. And obviously history, there's no characters. When you get into a character, you actually see the world through the character's eyes. And writing the novel allowed me to start to see the world through my character's eyes. And this is where I began to get some understanding of Simpson and Blakely. I had a couple of officers, or I should say, they're sort of the combination of officers that I had that were less than perfect. And so I got even by taking all these things and putting them in these two characters. But after I had started to see the world through their eyes and seeing their own fears, Simpson, he's from the opposite side of the tracks, and he's fearful that he's not going to be accepted by his peers. And these peers are, they're all lieutenant colonels, and they're good at parties, and they're good at, mixing and melding, and they're good at politics, and he's not. And so he's got these terrible fears in him, and he doesn't know what to do. And then he's got a real slick three who can manipulate him, because the slick three really does know how to do all that kind of stuff. But getting inside of his skin and looking at it through his viewpoint, then I begin to think about the officers that I thought were less than good. And I realized one of them was just in over his head. Is that his fault? No, it was the fault of the guy that put him there. And I look back, he was probably 38 or 39 years old, in over his head, made some really stupid decisions. But I began to see, yeah, I can understand that. And so the anger went away. So that was one of the big changes that happened to me with writing the book, was seeing things through someone else's eyes. Which goes back to that theme I'm talking about, to be a good leader. You got to start to see things beyond your own perspective.